the future of the gun. I'm Stephanie Shabazz, and this is Bookmarks. Hello and welcome to Bookmarks. I'm your host, Stephanie Shabazz. And joining us today are host and author, Frank Miniter, author of the new book, The Future of the Gun, and published by Regenery Publishing, and PhD candidate, James Hedrick. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Now, Frank Miniter, give us in a nutshell what the thesis of your book is.
Right, I wanted to get to the truth about the gun issue. And so the best way I thought to go about that was to actually go on the streets with gang members and then go with police officers and then actually go with lobbyists, with gun rights lobbyists, onto the Hill and see what they really do to get behind that curtain. I went to major gun manufacturers into their R&D departments to see what they're working on, what was the future technologically of the gun, and spent a lot of time with gun designers and more all around just to try to get where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going as a gun-owning nation.
Now, James, you had a chance to be able to read the book,
I did.
To review it and to critique it a bit. So give us your take on what you believe the book is about.
All right. There's a couple things I actually liked about the book, and one of the first things I liked about the book was the focus on the tech, the focus on technology. And I have to admit that it's a target point scope. That's just 10 kinds of cool. But what I think that something that's missing in the book is that the technology that's there makes it possible, and I think that that's one of the benefits of the technology here, makes it possible to actually have a gun control, a gun regulatory system that actually allows for broad gun ownership and safety at the same time, which is something I don't think you see broadly, at least not now in the United States. So what I think that what I would like to see the book have more of is how that tech can be applied to actually controlling and monitoring and making safer the use and presence of guns in the United States.
Well, yeah, that's the big debate now, or smart guns, is whether you should have the government authorizing them and mandating that technology. Many problems with that. First of all, it's major Second Amendment infringement. It would ban every gun on the market now, and there are many on the market.
But I think that and I have to say that reading through the book, I think that's a pretty scurrilous argument. I don't think anybody's thinking right now, anybody's proposing at the moment of removing all the guns that currently exist.
On the books in New Jersey since 2002. As soon as there's a smart gun on the market, all the other guns, all the other handguns, are illegal to be sold.
Right.
That's the threat, and the gun control groups are talking about that a lot.
And I don't think that there's any possibility of that at a national level, and I think to argue that it is a bit disingenuous.
It isn't when it's coming from that side. It's a real issue. It's a threat.
I don't think it's a threat at all. I think that you've got a situation in which you've got a possibility for technology to advance the ability of guns to be used safely.
I'll tell you what's sad is that this technology is actually being stopped right now, and I heard this from firearms manufacturers. They're reluctant to invest in it because of the threats to mandate it, because that has gun owners worried about that government control of their firearms. So right there, you're stopping the technological development of a safer gun. And meanwhile, the Washington Post and many other mainstream media are blaming the NRA for being opposed to smart gun technology, which they are not. Their official position is that they're opposed to being mandated, but they take no position on the technology itself, which they don't usually take a position on any technology.
And so here's the issue: is I think that you've got a very basic economic argument there, and I don't see that gun manufacturers, if there's change in the industry, if there's a change in the market, such as the mandating of all new guns having biotechnology or trigger locks or anything like that, I don't see any gun manufacturer not taking that opportunity to manufacture more and sell more guns.
So what do you say to that? Because this is now an opportunity. You're saying, okay, this is economically feasible, or this is economically an opportunity. Why wouldn't gun manufacturers want to take an opportunity like that?
Well, they're afraid of mandate, for one, because that you can't fit this technology to every gun available. There's too many makes, models, designs. The technology itself is new. It needs to be tested, it needs to be vetted. Does it work? Does it not work? Gun owners say, wait a second, I've got a device, a gun, a mechanical device designed to save my life potentially, an officer's life or a homeowner's life. and yet you want me to put the uncertainty of a battery and electronics into that system. Before I will do that, you have to prove to me it works. The best way to do that is let the market decide. And there are real good niches in the market for this product. I mean, a prison guard, that's a great place for it. Some schools, possibly. That'll make school board members feel a little bit better. Okay, we put this into our schools. But in order to let that happen, let the technology develop, government has to stay out of the way.
Before you get a chance to respond, I'd like to remind our audience that you can submit your questions to our guests through our website, www.publicsquare.net, and we'll answer as many of your questions as we can towards the end of the show. So if you want to get a chance to respond to
I think I do, and I think that, you know, I think there's an analogy to the car industry in this regard, where you raise CAFE standards, and what happens is you get much more you get much more energy efficient, gasoline efficient cars, and you mandate certain safety technology. And I think that's what spurs our research and development is a market now in which you have to have these, and it's not a niche market, and it's not, you know, programmed to a very small slice of what your overall market is, but the much larger one, that's what's going to spur research and development.
No, a better analogy is not CAFE standards, but it's electric cars versus gas-powered engines. You're suggesting right now that everyone should have to drive electric cars, and the other engines should all be banned.
I don't think
that's the state of this technology.
I think that's not anything that anybody in a national system is proposing at all. That you ban all other guns and that you remove all other guns from the market.
Well, then I don't understand what your question is. What are you proposing?
That I'm saying that if the issue, like you were saying, is the fact that the research and development is not there and that the technology needs to be improved, then in which I think that mandating things like trigger locks, things like biometrics, things of that nature, swiping thing, we put your fingerprint, and they're that kind of stuff, then I think the broader the market, the more research and development is going to go into it, not if it's a niche field.
All gun manufacturers in the United States already ship every gun with a trigger lock. And that's volunteer. That isn't a government mandate. The system is already working.
Okay. It's a good example of, you know, a wide-based technology. I don't think that there's anything that says that the technology can't be advanced much more quickly and can't be advanced much more quickly through government action.
It can't be.
I strongly disagree
You're
with every other
comparing capitalism to communism at that point.
I'm not even coming close to that. I'm talking about every
government
other
mandates
instance
and control versus a free market.
No,
that's the difference.
No, it's not. No, it's not. It's putting incentives into the free market that you research and develop types of technology that makes products safer. Airbags, seat belts, etc. If we go back to the car analogy.
So you're not suggesting mandate, you're suggesting spending public money to develop smart gun technology.
No, I didn't say
what are you
anything of the
suggesting?
No, I'm saying that we mandate safety technology in particular industries.
So you're mandating smart guns.
Huh? No, I'm mandating safety technology. There's a variety
what is
of
the
them
safety
that you
technology?
mentioned. There's biometrics, trigger locks, all sorts of things
that's
like
smart
that.
gun technology. So
Okay.
you're mandating smart gun technology, which is exactly what I'm talking about, which is a wet blanket on the whole issue. Gun owners are up in arms. Second Amendment gone.
It's not even it doesn't even come close to violating the Second
Every gun now on the
Amendment.
market gets banned if that's what you do.
No.
Literally. You can't retrofit.
No, you have to redesign the guns that you have on the market to have the technology.
It's a very new technology that's just being tested. The cool new one is out of Kodiak Arms, the IntelliGun, which is a conversion kit for a 1911 pistol.
Yeah.
It took him years to engineer it correctly so it fits that one type of pistol, one of the most popular types of pistols ever made. So he's figured it out pretty much and is almost on the market with this idea, with this design. Hasn't been vetted, hasn't been tested. The market hasn't really seen it. We have to see if it really works. Is this a viable option? And then people will buy it because there are good uses for this product. And if they buy it, then it grows in the marketplace. You put government involved, you get to that level, or the mandate you're talking about, you've killed it.
I don't think so, because seatbelts didn't kill the auto industry, neither did airbags.
The president of the company I just talked
in
about
difference.
had a meeting with the Attorney General Eric Holder, looked across the table at him when Holder said what you're saying, and said, if you try to mandate my technology, I will burn it down. That's the level we're talking about here.
I don't think that any company that's involved in a profit-making enterprise is going to burn their company down if there's a way for them to still make money.
Then you're very naive.
No, I don't think so.
I've been to those firearms manufacturers, and they believe in the Second Amendment as an individual right, as a real freedom, and this kind of government intrusion they wouldn't stand for.
So my question is this: is then the question then finding out something that is a specific innovation, and what would you say perhaps is one innovation that could be added to a particular gun, or maybe that could be added into the industry that might be that might make the guns more safe, or that might be an interest to the gun manufacturers, that might make them some profit? Because what seems to be the issue here is, listen, we're seeing a profit coming in, and what he's saying is, listen, airbags, they weren't just a safety feature, they were profitable because now I need them. So maybe what's one innovation that you're saying?
Guns have gotten safer and safer and better designed. That's not the issue here we're talking about. We're talking about control and not safety. When I talk about safety, why isn't the government working with the gun rights groups to enhance some of their safety programs they have? The NRA has something like 60,000 certified firearms instructors all around the country teaching safety courses. Yet that's not in the mainstream media. I don't hear Rick Holder talking about that. Why not? Why don't they work with those parties and say, you're doing good things out there, you're trying to make this a safer country, and gun deaths are way down in this country. Police shootings, way down in this country. Homicide rate, massively fallen over the last 3 or 4 decades as the gun ownership rate has massively skyrocketed. Okay, there are good things happening. Why don't we hear the government talking about that and getting involved and trying to help those programs make this a safer place?
I think there's a couple of issues that come up with that. And number one is I don't think you hear the government talking about gun control much at all. And I think that you've got a Senate bill that was recently passed that just was, basically expanded background checks that got shot down. It was supported by 65% of the country. Like, I don't think that there's anybody at this point actually right now talking about anything serious when it comes to making guns safer or gun control or gun regulation in general. And in that part, I agree with you. The second thing is that I don't believe for a second that the gun lobby, and particularly the NRA, would stand by if a state mandated that anybody that wanted to purchase a gun had to go through a registration program or a training program that was even as tough as what you need to get licensed to drive a car.
Illinois is much harder than driving a car. 16 hours of... There are a lot of states have different laws around the country.
And I don't
the NRA isn't some all-powerful thing.
I'm not saying the NRA isn't, and the NRA wouldn't support that. I don't think it would support it on a national level. If you're telling me they would, then great.
I'm not saying mandating people go through a certain training course. I'm saying helping people find them so they're there. Most Americans are good people. They don't want problems in the streets and gun violence and these things. They're good people. If you give them those resources to use, they'll use them. Most people are law-abiding. You look at concealed carry permit owners. There are about 10 million of them in the country now. They basically don't commit crimes. It's hard to find one who has used their gun illegally.
I don't think that's true at all.
It is.
There was a survey in the state of Texas that people that had concealed handgun permits were much more likely to escalate violent incidents and then be charged and prosecuted for them.
That's not true.
No, that's exceptionally true.
Where did your
Texas Public Safety? American Journal of Public Health, 2013.
So I'll have to look at it. I'm not familiar with it.
Go ahead and look it up, but I'm telling you that, yes, I don't disagree with you that most Americans are good people, too. Good people have bad times. Good people have bad incidences. And I don't think at any point that necessarily it takes a bad person to have a bad decision or a bad person to have a bad incident or a bad person to have bad behavior. And none of those things do I think. And plus, there's plenty of information about how to find gun training programs and find gun safety programs. You can do it fairly easily. You can go on and Google it.
You have to go to a gun store. You have to get into that community, and not everyone is involved in that. There's so many new gun owners right now that I'm just hoping they're finding those resources because they're out there. But it would be better if we were talking to each other.
But I don't think that there's any. I don't think there's any barrier to communication that the government's putting. I don't think the government is establishing any barrier to communication of gun companies and people like the NRA getting into communication with people that own guns. I don't think that communicating with their customers is a problem. All right, but I don't think that you increase the rate of trained gun carriers by doing a voluntary and not particularly well organized communication program.
It's voluntary, but it is well organized. But helping get the word out is all I'm saying.
Let's look at one of the quotes. I'm sorry to interrupt you guys, but let's look at one of the quotes along these lines from his actual book, The Future of the Gun. In your book, you said, if our free citizens are barred from using firearms similar to those used by the military, then we won't be prepared as a nation. Would you care to respond to that?
This is where you're talking about the fact that if you can't use an assault rifle and AR-15, then you won't be ready to go into the military. That's pretty much that section, chapter 1, if I remember correctly.
An armed citizenry is more likely to be more proficient and better prepared to enter the military.
Exactly what about owning an AR-15 allows you to become a tech on a nuclear submarine? Or a nuclear aircraft carrier, or fly an aircraft carrier.
I'm talking about people who use M16s, M4s, not.
And I think that if you're talking about the technology and the future of the gun, the future of the military is not in toting around an M4 carbine.
Well, I don't know. Maybe it'll all be drones at some point. That I can't forecast.
Well, then I think
but right now
should
it
get
is a big
behind doing
benefit.
video
Historically,
games.
it's always been a big benefit to have an armed citizenry that understands this stuff. And I interviewed a lot of special forces people about that. One of them put it very plainly to me, who trained people in America and in other countries. He said the special forces is in the business of creating country boys. He said he had to spend most of his time training people from America who came from non-gun owning backgrounds, because it took so much time to learn how to handle a firearm safely and effectively.
And I've heard anecdotes that say the exact opposite, that a lot of military training is untraining people that don't know how to fire a gun correctly, or at least in the Army way.
I've never heard that.
I've heard that I've heard that from
people.
my own father and family members, one who was a Marine trainer and the other who was a paratrooper. And part of training people to come in and handle a gun correctly and fight in a force and fight in a unit is to teach them how to work and fire a gun the Army way, not shooting at squirrels, or in my case, rabbits. But
I think you're making a big mistake on that. There's a gun handling. It's like any sport. When you learn to shoot a gun, it's like any sport. I mean, if you start young enough at tennis or at boxing or at baseball, you have an affinity and you get better and better at it. And it's the same with firearms. It's a hand-eye that you get used to. It's a familiarity and a comfort that comes from that.
And I don't disagree that familiarity and comfort is useful. I don't think it's necessary for a militia, for an armed citizenry, or for an army. In fact, I think that you look at World War I, you look at Vietnam, you look at the Korean War. We drafted hundreds of thousands of people who'd never fired guns before, put them in our army, and turned out soldiers in basic training. I think that's an argument that's not really necessary. I don't think it's necessary for the military.
You talk to people who fought in those theaters, it was the ones with experience that survived and that taught the others. It's an important part of being here. I mean, but I don't think everyone should have to fire a gun or own a gun or use a gun, but I believe in the freedom to do so.
And so do I. And I don't think that anybody is talking about removing the freedom to own a gun.
You're talking about removing the freedom to own an AR-15.
No, I'm not personally.
Okay, I thought you were.
No, I think that AR-15 is a completely unnecessary weapon. I think that it has no other purpose than, murder mayhem. I've fired them before. You can hunt pigs with them.
I've hunted with them. I've shot 3-gun tournaments with them. They're wonderful for home protection, but they're just fun to shoot.
Yeah, they're incredibly fun to shoot, and I think that's great. I don't think you should take away the ability for somebody to own what you don't call an assault rifle, but what is essentially an assault rifle. And but I think that you got to go through a much more stringent process to be able to take that gun around, and you have to prove that you can use it safely.
Yeah, but who's using these guns inappropriately? Less than 3% of murders are done by rifles.
I know.
And the AR types are even a smaller percentage.
Yeah,
it's like 76% of murders are handguns, mostly inner city.
Yes, but when you talk about not only murders, but when you talk about the numbers, all right, when you talk about mass killings and things like that, the likelihood of there being what would be defined as an assault rifle or a semi-automatic
Actually,
rifle,
that's not true.
They go up significantly. The deaths go up and the uses go up.
That's not true.
It is.
No. The media doesn't report on this very much, but most mass shootings are done with handguns, and usually it's because how do you define a mass shooting? Is it 3 people? Is it 4 people? When you start defining it, then you end up it's mostly gang warfare that are mass shootings.
Well, Frank, let's talk about mass shootings, particularly when it talks about schools. You talked about something very interesting in your book, as it talks about the idea about even training teachers. And training them within a school to be able to use handguns or some type of weapon to be able to protect students in that idea. Could you talk a little bit more about that and that idea you raised in your book?
Yeah, I would first say that teachers are not police officers, and I don't think every one of them should have to carry a gun. I think that would be silly.
Right.
But those with a background, maybe military, or just a comfort with firearms that can pass a concealed carry permit license requirement, and if a school board wants another kind of safety program of some kind, great. They can go through that process and they can be a line of defense for our children. I'm totally behind that. I think that's fantastic. So, that's basically where I am on it. Yeah.
And did you care to respond to that?
A couple of things. I think there's much more efficient, more effective ways of increasing the safety in our schools. Lockdowns, having, paying attention to the people who come on site, things like that. I think that's much more. I also think that once again, you just get into the situation of anybody with a gun that has a bad day, I start to get more worried than less, because they have a tool designed to inflict harm on other people and the ability at that split second to make a really, really poor decision. I've come from a family of teachers. My mother's a teacher, my father's a teacher. Every one of my aunts and uncles, except I think for one, is a teacher, and I was for a while in a community college situation, and it's a stressful job, and I don't necessarily recommend that we arm them.
Some are capable, and I'm not saying
Some
they
are
all have
capable,
to,
some
you
are
know,
not,
and
but
that would be a great line of defense.
I
Because
don't
nothing
think it
stops.
would.
If you do the research, nothing stops a shooter faster than an armed citizen or a police officer with a firearm. It always stops as soon as that enters the scene. Most of them that are doing those kind of mass shootings that we're talking about, not the gang-related, you just take these out of it, the Adam Lanzes of the group, they have real mental health issues. And going after that, it takes an armed citizen, hopefully one is there to stop it. If not, at least it takes some better mental health requirements that we have now. And it's silly to me that we don't see that really being passed in Congress. In fact, a very good bill was stopped that Lindsey Graham was the chief sponsor of that would have improved the background check system. And it was stopped because Democrats wanted to pass something else and didn't want to talk about this one that was NRA backed. So right now, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, the trade association for firearms manufacturers, is on its own lobbying state by state to try to shore up the national instant background check system. And they're having some success, but you're seeing no mainstream media coverage, no support. They're opposed to it, it seems like, just by not even, they could be helping. This is a good initiative.
So we're going to actually begin to take some questions from our viewers. And this first question is from Samantha McCoy. And she says, as demonstrated by recent current events, it appears obvious that police have tremendous over-reliance on guns. It seems that the first response is always to shoot rather than alternative methods of subduing people, regardless of whether or not the other person is carrying a weapon. As a result, many unnecessary fatalities have occurred. What are your thoughts on that? How do you respond?
The number of that police using their firearms, it's down. My experience, they don't just pull their guns or shooting. And if someone does that, they should be prosecuted. This is why I argue that police need cameras on them. It would help them, and it would diffuse situations like Ferguson. If we had video immediately available, I mean, the street rumors wouldn't have been what they became. The media wondering what's going on and inflaming it by just wondering, that wouldn't have occurred to you. You've had the truth right off. We're getting to a point now technologically as well where we can even put a camera in the front of the gun that would immediately, as soon as you take that out of your holster, it turns on. That technology can be easily built in. I've talked to engineers about this and how to do that. That's wonderful. That watches the watchers in a way. But it also gives us the honest truth right away about what's going on. So we can censor who needs to be censored. Most cops are really good guys, and a really tough decision, having to make split-second decisions.
I can largely agree. And I mean, I think the technology, camera technology is something that definitely should be involved and should be mandated right now. And I think at the national level, and it should be done tomorrow. I think that cameras on the ends of guns are a good idea, but if you go back to the technology, you don't have issues with biometric technology, but the ability of a camera to be on the end of a gun, you shouldn't be making different types of arguments about the technology. One more thing before we get along. The other bit is that I think that most cops are good guys, and most police shootings, there's too many of them, but one would be too many, I think, in most cases. Sure. But I think that what you've got in this situation is showing how hard it is to use a gun in a situation like that, even when you have highly trained people that are responsible for public safety have trouble using guns in situations like that. You're right. Camera technology significantly reduces the incidences of a cop pulling his gun, firing his gun, or anybody being injured in an altercation. Sure. And so I think that right there it shows how difficult it is to use a firearm in a tense situation when you're highly trained, much less a citizen that does not have that kind of training.
The camera doesn't interfere with the firing mechanism of the gun. Mm-hmm. That's very big difference in smart gun technology. Mm-hmm. So right there, I mean, I'm not opposed to police officers having smart gun technology if they choose. Local PD, whatever wants to do that. Great, test it out, try it. You think it would help your officers, because that's real danger, a gun being taken away from a cop. Great. I'm not opposed to smart gun technology. I'm just opposed to it being made mandatory.
And I think that comes to the crux of the issue. I think that if it's voluntary or non-mandatory, then you're never going to see the kind of adoption of the technology that's going to have any serious impact on safety.
Yeah, you will. Well,
I don't see that at all. I don't see that even a little bit.
Sure. How often? I mean, firearms are safe already. Firearms deaths are way down of children and so on. It's becoming safer and safer, and we're continuing down that path. But I don't see how mandating that would make it safer at all. The guns would still be available. We have over 300 million guns in this country. I don't see why a kid can't break through the code on a smart gun if that's what he really wants to do.
I think the difference between a kid breaking through the code on a smart gun and the kid turning the safety off is significantly different. And I think that the ability to do that is significantly different. And I think that a kid that gets a hold of a loaded gun and to flicks the safety off is much more likely to cause damage.
I don't know. You have a false sense of security with a gun with that kind of sensor on it.
I think that's
a real worry. Let the technology prove itself. Let the market bear it out and prove it. There are real niches, great niches for it.
I know they're great.
Let it go. Don't get in the way.
Let's take another question from a viewer. And this is from John Lott. And he said, with these handguns that can only be fired by those with a special watch costing upwards of $1,800, what is the impact of requiring this feature on poor people who want guns for protection? More generally, are you concerned about the hundreds of dollars required for fees and training here in Maryland and other states in obtaining a gun on poor people's ability to defend themselves?
Great question, and that is a big problem, especially for less wealthy people suddenly can't use their Second Amendment right because, that Armitex gun, which is one of the smart guns out of Germany, is $1,800, at least 3 times the price of a regular firearm. And if the fees really start getting in the way and the paperwork makes it so difficult for a person to, that needs to be vetted because there is a place where that becomes a real infringement. I agree. Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's 2 points coming out of that question. One, we go back to the mass production issue. If you want to reduce the cost of something, you have to get it into mass production, not a niche. This is basic economics. A niche system is going to keep the cost high. If you want to reduce the cost of that gun, you have to make it widely available and widely adopted. And I think the way to do that is to go back and sort of have some sort of mandate, state level, wherever you want. The other thing when it comes down to the costs, that's much less of a concern for me. I think that the basic political process will hash that out. All right, if a state ends up charging too much, they'll go back and forth. There'll be some organizing. People will come in there. They'll get them to lower the fees. It's not a money-making issue.
You don't care that a college student with a stalker, a real issue, a person violently after them, can't afford to go then and buy a firearm to protect herself? You don't care that suddenly she's priced out of the market?
I'm not concerned about that because I don't think that that's a major issue.
It is a major issue.
I don't think it is because I think that there's many other ways to deal with stalkers. One, and I think that for two, you're not going to price people out of the market that badly if you really need it. You don't price people a lot out of being able to drive cars for the most part.
$1,800 is a lot of money to a lot of people.
$1,800 is a lot for a smart gun right now that fills a niche market, not a mass-produced issue. And we're not even just talking about the smart gun. We're talking about registration fees right now. All right, people pay registration fees for cars.
Have mandates made other things cheaper? Cars and computers? No, it's the free market that again and again has made those cheaper.
No, it's incentivized the free market to make them cheaper by making them mass-produced technology. I'd go back to the car example.
Computers are incentivized?
I'm sorry.
iPhones,
the development of the internet was incentivized, which allowed there to be more useful.
Yeah, that's debated, and I don't. Yeah, I'm not.
It was developed by the government. It was developed by the government.
Creation of it, and it got taken and turned into something else. And
But technology significantly reduced the cost. That's exactly my point. It reduces the cost of the personal computer. Personal computer goes into every home. They become a much broader used commodity. The price drops significantly. Not only
right. They work so well in Russia. Yeah.
I think that's an argument which I think that's just insulting. To think that I'm arguing for any sort of
that's what you're arguing. You can have one product from a patented company to make the same thing over and over again for everybody.
I'm not saying that at all.
That's what happens when you mandate.
No, I'm not saying that
over and over again. I think everyone knows where we are in this. Let me make another point that's an important point. Let's divide this, okay? Right now we're talking about the law-abiding gun owner, okay? Usually a pretty good person. What we're really worried about, though, is the criminal side of this thing, which I've done a bunch of investigation on. I was with gangs, with the ATF to find out where do they get their guns. Is any of this smart gun technology or anything going to stop that and reduce those murders? No. Here's where they're getting their guns. They're stealing them. According to the ATF, there are 190,000 guns stolen every year in the United States. So I think we need some kind of, to talk about a safe campaign for how we lock them, how we store them, how we deal with that situation, because a lot of people don't know. Not mandates, not a huge government program, just a conversation, because a lot of people don't get that. Then the other way they get them are straw purchasing, which is where a guy goes in and buys who can pass a background check, buys a gun for a bad guy. We're not prosecuting those guys. You go and do that.
That's something we can agree upon totally.
We're not going
I think that you've got to enforce it, but if you're going to enforce it, go back to your chapter on the ATF. You've got to get the ATF more money and more people. The main problem the ATF came back with that I got out of reading your interview with the ATF, and it's just picking one example out of it, with the ATF, was that they were understaffed and underfunded. We've got
any government agency will tell you they're understaffed and underfunded.
Yeah, and I think that the ATF is a particularly poor example.
Yeah, they've shown some poor judgment in some cases in Fast and Furious and some other places. What I really gathered from them that, okay, more resources, I'm not against if it's targeted right and so on. Let's talk about that. Great. What I really got from them is they're not working closely enough with gun stores and FFLs, Federal Firearms Licensed Dealers. They're visiting them on average in New York metropolitan area once every 10 years, and they too often see them and sort of as if they're wrong or something, and they only go to them when it's time to discipline them. Most of those guys, in my experience with gun store owners, they're pretty good guys. They like their freedom, and they don't want to sell guns to bad guys. And even if they did, typically the black market price is only a couple $100 more than retail. So why would they risk a felony conviction for that? And if they are doing that, let's get them, let's bust them, let's make it public. And they're not doing any of that stuff. That's where I see the issue.
And I think, well, that comes right back to needing more staff and more resources. So if you've got the NRA and you're complaining about gun control, you're complaining about gun control people not backing your voluntary training program.
Their focus is
why
wrong.
Why does the NRA sit there and like stop the appointment of an official that had the ATF for 7 years?
So what can the focus be on to be able to make sure, because I would agree with you that the concern for the larger population is that we're seeing crime happening, we're seeing a lot of these things happen with guns. What can the focus be on so that we're having not an increase in these crimes?
We need to stop focusing on the gun as if the gun is the bad thing, and focus on the bad guy, and arrest him, and let the free person who can pass the background check and is not committing crimes use their constitutional right to bear arms. It's empirically shown over and over again that reduces crime every time we do it. Places like Chicago, where that freedom has been taken away, that's where we see the murder rate going up and up. It's interesting or it's scary. In 2012, when Chicago became the murder capital per capita of the United States, that same year it had the least number of federal prosecutions of gun crimes on the federal level. That's out of all jurisdictions, federal jurisdictions in the United States. That's crazy. How can you have the most murders and the least number of federal prosecutions of gun crimes? We have to go and enforce these laws and let individuals who are law-abiding citizens use their freedom to help.
Well, you call the gun freedom's tool in your book. Can you explain a bit more exactly why or what you mean by that?
Yeah, well, it's always has been. From the beginning of this country, when we've used them to hunt and self-protection and so on, it's always been a part of our freedom, a part of our individual rights and freedom to protect ourselves, because cops can't be everywhere. They can try, and that's great, but they can't be everywhere. So it's empowering that individual. That I call it freedom's tool. It's your personal individual right and freedom. It's a women's right. It's an elderly person's right. It's not as strong as a potential attacker. It equalizes those things. It makes them more able to live on their own and have a healthier, happier life. But to do that, they have to take the gun training and understanding, and if they're not comfortable with that, they shouldn't do that. Person who's not comfortable with a gun, I don't want them with a gun. Either become comfortable or don't. Or drive or don't. If you're not comfortable driving, don't drive. It's the same thing as far as I'm concerned.
Did you have a response or reflection on that?
Just a couple of things. And I mean, I think for a lot of things we agree on what would be nice, and I would like to see everybody that owns a gun be heavily trained, heavily licensed, and have to do it again and again, like you have to go get your car license again. The other thing that I think is that this focus on the bad people who might have the guns, the criminals who might get them. I think that's great in the way of enforcement. We should enforce those gun crimes. We shouldn't allow straw sales. If you're selling, we should close loopholes on, selling gun shows, things like that. But I think the thing is that this focus on the criminals and the bad people misses a lot of the issue of good people make bad decisions. And good people make what they think are good decisions in tense situations that turn out to have bad consequences. And I think that focusing the entire argument
on examples?
Because
I really don't see that happen.
I think that you can find plenty of examples. And one of the things is that a woman that lives in a house with a gun is about 5 times more likely to be shot or injured by that gun by her husband. A woman is more likely to be, if we're talking about women's issues with guns, a woman's about 6 times more likely to be shot by a husband, ex, or boyfriend than they are to be by a male stranger.
Those stats are from groups with a policy against guns.
Those stats are from the FBI. Those stats are from the FBI, and they're from you take your stats in your book from organizations that are pro-gun control. So I don't see the problem with bringing those in.
I talked both.
You talk.
You look at the footnotes, and I footnote both.
I looked through the footnotes. All right, you've got some that are old, you got some that are new, and you take some out of context. But
such as
the Gallup polls.
The Gallup polls.
Gallup polls. There's a couple of them that you missed in there that I think would I mean, you're trying to make a point. You're not trying to be objective, so I understand that. 50%.
It's a very objective book. It's the most objective book you're going to see on the gun issue.
It's not close to an objective
And the
book.
Gallup poll, the number one that comes to my mind in the Gallup poll is the number of people, this poll has taken, I think, since 1959, do you support handgun control? They've asked that over and over and over again, so it's a great sample over a half century.
It's panel, yeah.
Back in the 50s, it was, you correct me if I'm wrong, but it was around 60% wanted more gun control. Now, I think in 2013, it was 74% didn't want more gun control. The whole thing is flopped.
Well, what you have is, what you do in the Gallup poll of 2012, 2013 is about 50% support stricter gun sale laws. You've got about 65 support stricter background checks. When you ask about the individual, when you ask about do you support handgun bans, do you oppose the banning of handguns, which is the question you're talking about, 74% say no. Right. When you ask about particular things, particular mandates that would make guns safer, enforcing stricter background checks, stricter gun sale laws, enforcing current laws, what you get is much more.
The problem with the universal background check thing, and I think the polling, to my mind, it's not where people really are on the issue, because there's so much media bias on that issue, saying this is what we need, this is what we need, this is what we need. Why won't they agree to this? Why won't they agree to this?
So the media is not affecting the banning of handguns question, but it is affecting the background checks.
That's a long-running poll. They've lost the argument nationally.
Oh, so that's what. So there's a media conspiracy to, and it's only affecting one or two of the questions, and not the specific
over a long
questions.
time. It's a very different sample than a very recent issue where the public education hasn't had a chance to catch up, which is where the universal background check issue is. So I treat it very honestly.
I don't agree with you at that at all, and I think that's
go read the media and see how they talk about that issue.
I have, and I just don't think that you have a reasonable argument to say that it affects the Gallup polling or Pew Research Center, whoever the heck's doing the polling, that it affects the polling on one question, but it doesn't affect it on the other.
Go ask a poller. Is one more accurate that goes over a half century of time asking the same question, or one that's very recent and just new to people?
I am a trained pollster.
Then you're really spinning hard here, man.
No, I'm not spinning hard at all. You're talking about a panel study that you can't change the wording on over 50 years.
Right.
All right? Question wording can have a big difference. What you're asking is a general question, but when you get down into specifics, people are much more likely to support specifics, stricter gun sale laws and background checks.
To a gun ban. I don't. They're not the same thing.
I know. That's what I'm saying. They're not the same thing.
As we're wrapping up, that's actually a really good question to wrap up on. For someone who's considering to look at your book or to consider your book, tell us why they should think about even looking at your book, about the future of the gun, about the backgrounds that you've looked at, the polls you've considered, the research that you've done. Why is it that they should pick this up?
Let me tell you about the guy I talked about in the introduction, John Annoni. Okay, he's a elementary school teacher in Allentown, Pennsylvania, who grew up in the projects, really tough neighborhood, saw guns in a really bad way for a very long time. He was taken out of that neighborhood by his uncle, who was a hunter, and took him hunting and showed him how to safely use a gun and shoot a gun and use it in that way. And he said, wait a second, I'm used to guns being this negative, bad thing, and here's this positive gun. And by using it correctly, that's what a mature person does. So I'm learning how to be a mature person by using this gun correctly. So if I see a gun now on the street, I know how not to use it or to, I get what that is. I'm no longer as afraid of that. I get it. So he's decided to take that and save inner city kids by using the good gun values to go into that bad gun culture where they have to get their grades up to a certain level. They have to not get in trouble at school. And then he'll train them to NRA rules of gun safety. They'll learn how to shoot properly. They will finally get to go hunting after several years in this program. And they improve by using the good gun culture to come into the bad. That's how we can start to affect change. Even inner city kids who had never thought about hunting, never thought about guns in these ways. That's that positive nature that can solve some of the problems we have in the city. Those are the kinds of solutions I talk about in the future of the gun.
Gotcha. We actually got one more question online recently, and it's from David Chavez, and he said this: do you think the ban on fully automatic weapons violates the Second Amendment? Why or why not?
I don't think it does. It's been in law since 1934. Where they weren't popularly used machine guns at the time, which is the Supreme Court's caveat on that. If it's a popularly used gun, it's not unusual, as the AR-15s are not unusual, despite what a Maryland court judge just said. Then they're covered by the Second Amendment, and machine guns didn't fit into that category. Now we have semi-automatic. A lot of people are confused. Semi-automatic, you pull the trigger each time it goes off once. Machine gun, you hold the trigger down and it keeps firing. So no, I don't think it's a problem.
How about you? What are your thoughts on it?
Oh yeah, I actually agree on that one. I got nothing else to say on machine guns.
Interesting.
No,
they're fun to shoot.
They're incredibly fun to shoot.
Yeah, but,
lots of things are fun to shoot, man. Right. There's a lot of cars that are fun to drive too, but you need a license before you get behind the wheel.
Thank you so much for joining me, gentlemen. All right, that's all for this week. Thank you for watching Bookmarks. I'm Stephanie Shabazz. We'll see you next time.